I had some technical difficulties, so I don't have my side of the interview, but I'll go ahead and give you the questions. This first question I asked Seth to give a background about himself, as well as the Morales Group, what they do, and just overall a little bit of a summary of him and the company.
Yep. I'll start with Morales Group, and then I'll share a little bit about my role, and I'll keep it kind of short and sweet. But from many years back, started with my grandfather, who was a tomato migrant worker, and he came up from South Texas to Indiana to pick tomatoes in the summer, and he did that for 6 years, and finally kind of got tired of going back and forth, and said, "Hey, I'm going to call Indianapolis my home." And he stuck a flag in the ground and said, "Let's make and build a better future for the Morales family." And so fast forward, he had 6 kids, and one of them was my father. He's a guy that was second oldest and went to Purdue University, was an engineer, and then later in life, at the age of 50, he started the company Morales Group. And it was kind of founded on the premise of my grandfather was on his deathbed, dying of cancer, and he really wanted my dad to find a way to really give back and serve the community. And the one way my dad felt like serving the community was providing a job and making a difference in somebody's life. And it not only affected them, but their family. And so, fast forward 17 years later, Morales Group has had a lot of growth. What we do at Morales Group is we provide um, staffing and recruiting services, primarily in the blue collar light industrial market. So, any type of Amazon job where you're doing fulfillment services, you're doing some sort of pick and pack job where you're doing fulfillment like work. That's what we staff up. So we have on average around 3,000 to 4,000 external teammates working for us weekly. And then we have about 150 corporate teammates in our Indianapolis headquarter office. So we've had a lot of growth. I think initially as a company, we grew off of just building some trust and awareness in the Latino Hispanic community. And over time, kind of turned into 31 flavors, which was really interesting. We were a company that really embraced and supported diversity. And we took folks from all walks and backgrounds who maybe were marginalized or underserved and needed an opportunity. And whether it was 12 or $15 an hour, that was a start. And it might be any job, but eventually we wanted to take them from any job to a better job to a career. And so we've got this kind of mission statement of why we do what we do, and it's to build a better future. And so we see staffing as a platform to give back and serve those that need a chance. And so we've grown quite a bit over the last 17 years. As a company, we have total sales annually of about 150 million, which has been fun to build upon. And we've got all types of demographics within our workforce of 3 to 4,000 strong. And we staff up all these warehouses that are shipping product to you today that, online fulfillment is a big deal. And they're essential and they're frontliners and they're important to us. And we've got offices in Charlotte, Louisville, Dallas, Indianapolis, and all throughout the state of Indiana. So we're kind of still a young company that's growing with, I think, a lot of momentum, and that's kind of the heart behind who we are. Me as a CEO, I didn't start off that way. I grew up here in Indianapolis, was a student athlete, and went to college at Purdue, and then got my master's, my MBA at Notre Dame. But I've been with the company for 15 years, played in a sales role to start, then eventually got into management and then into executive leadership and then president and then finally CEO this um, actually like 3 months ago. So just kind of fresh off the boat with that.
Here I mentioned to Seth that we're a leadership communication course. Later in the semester, I'll give a lecture where I talk about how I think leaders shouldn't just have open door policies or talk about the importance of communication, but that they should actually take the steps both verbally and non-verbally to normalize communication. So all that being said, I asked Seth if he could take some time and explain how important communication is with the Morales Group and what are some of the ways that he himself, as a leader, as a CEO of this company, the different ways that he might enact this idea of normalizing communication within the company to make sure that everybody knows how important it is.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think from our standpoint, we have a really healthy and engaged culture. And we've done that because we've been very authentic and human with the way we communicate. And we try to communicate in a way that is very transparent and real. A couple weeks back, we had to do a company layoff, and that was tough. We hadn't done a layoff in over 7 or 8 years, and that was not an easy thing to do. And I had to stand before the group and say, "Hey, listen, we're in kind of a shit show right now with the crisis of COVID-19, and I don't know what's around the corner, and I don't know what the economy's going to do, but I can tell you that we're going to be real and authentic with our communication. Um, we're going to be communicating in a way that's just consistent and very frequent throughout the week." And so I think being honest and transparent about how you communicate has been helpful for us because I think it creates a sense of trust and empathy that's been good for our team. I think being honest about not knowing what's ahead and just kind of shooting them straight has been, I think, a key for us as we've kind of trying to navigate through this crisis. So I think there's a lot of different leaders out there. I think those that can be human and be authentic. Some of the things that I've done over the last few weeks has been just a quick selfie video, and I've done a 2-minute video of myself at home and just talking about, hey, this is where we're at. This is what's going on. This is what sucks. This is why we had to fire this person. This is why we had to do a layoff. And being real about that and being frequent about it and being kind of in an authentic human way rather than a corporate sounding email, a 2-minute, just this is me, this is how I roll, this is me at home. I think that's been really helpful.
At this point, I piggyback off of what Seth said and discuss the fact that right now, when we're recording this, it's April 2020. We're in the middle of this pandemic and shelter in place. And so I asked him if he could explain some of the things that they're doing now that their typical communication is being affected, because I think it's important for leaders to know how to handle communication in a crisis.
Yeah, I mean, communication is kind of flipped on its head. I mean, you talk about work from home. Our 150 corporate teammates are all working from home. We do have a few frontliners that are on site, on premise at our different warehouses where we have our external workforce working on a day to day basis. But communication is greatly changed. I mean, you think about for us, the lifeblood of our business is to recruit, and we do that in person. And so we had to flip our process on its head overnight. And now we recruit 100% virtually. And you're recruiting, you're communicating, okay, I have this job opening, and you're doing it over the web, you're doing it over the phone, you're doing it over text. So I think those old habits of recruiting from the past, where maybe you did it in person, you're doing a lot of that over a text message to kind of help coordinate and orient somebody before they get going. Or you do a virtual orientation on YouTube, and your communication is through platforms that are digital. And so that's been, I think, a huge change with just kind of the digital part of communication. I think the other part that has really changed over the last, I think 30, 60 days is just there's um there's just been a really, I think, this challenge of not knowing who's going to get sick. We've had teammates that have contracted COVID-19. We've had teammates that have had loved ones, close loved ones, family members, grandparents that have passed from COVID-19. So being able to communicate through those challenges as a team has been really important. And so making sure that we have a high empathy level, making sure that we're communicating often through. We've got a platform called Microsoft Teams, and that's where everyone kind of hangs out and definitely has a lot of their communication outside of email. And that's been really good to just be transparent and have a lot of, I think, good forms of communication. But it's been a game changer for us, and it's come in a lot of different forms. So we're just trying to navigate the challenges.
At this point, I wanted to move from a macro level discussion of leadership communication to a micro level. Seth, even though he's relatively new to the CEO position, he's been in a leadership position for quite some time with the Morales Group. So I wanted to ask him if students of mine had questions about how he handles communication just on a personal basis, what would he say, or what kind of advice would he give based on his own experience?
I think your job as a leader is to be able to tell your story. Um, that's powerful. And I think if you're a leader as a CEO or you're a leader inside a company where you don't hold a C-level title, but you've got some sort of management level, or you're just a leader at home, I think being able to articulate your story is really important. I think being able to communicate your brand on digital media, whether it's Instagram or LinkedIn or Facebook or Snapchat, whatever that looks like, there's a lot of different ways I think you can leverage how you communicate and how you tell your story. I was just the other day, I have an intern from Purdue University. He's going to be a junior, and he's a wide receiver. He's an All American. His name's Rondale Moore, and he's phenomenal. And I've been having these one-on-one sessions with him once a week. And I've been telling him, I'm like, look, Rondell, at the end of the day, whether you're an entrepreneur and you own this large, Fortune 500 company, or you're leading this small unit of leaders and it's a smaller business, your job is always to be how you articulate and communicate. And you, as a leader, need to over communicate. I think you also need to be succinct and simple in the way you kind of share. And I think you need to be authentic. And so I'll have these conversations with him about telling his story and learning to kind of talk about, where he came from, what his setbacks were, learning how to kind of keep his message tight and simplistic. And so I think people resonate with that. And so that's been, I think, important as I've been sharing that. So I think when I think about your students, it's really important that they understand how to tell their story, but more importantly, how they tell it on what platform. There's different platforms for different types of uses. And there's also different ways to kind of craft what you're saying, I think, in succinct, simple, bite-sized chunks that people can kind of resonate with.
At this point, I move away from leadership communication and I really want to get into storytelling. In the secret language of leadership, we really understand the importance of narrative intelligence, how important it is for the leader to know their own story, the story of their company, the story of their team, as well as a potential story of their clients or customers. Now, Seth, along with his wife Jackie, who's in charge of marketing and innovation, they work really hard in telling these stories. So I asked, what strategies or policies do they have in place, or what methods do they use to embrace storytelling?
Yeah, yeah, that's actually a really really good question, Art, because I think a lot of times we get kind of caught up in why we're unique, and that's not always important to our clients. And so when we're talking to our clients, it is important to, I think, share our purpose and share why we do what we do. But at the same time, we need to understand how we make them the hero and how we better position them to have success. And so thinking about how you can make value and wins for them when we talk to them and communicate, hey, this is why it makes sense for you to partner up with Morales Group, is because we've done this for someone very similar in another role, and we were able to kind of make them the hero in this situation because we did X, Y, and Z. And I think being able to articulate the value to them personally and less about who we are and more about trying to make the win about the other person. I think when you can communicate that way, you have a lot of stickiness with your client and you get good traction that way. So that's been helpful for us. We haven't always done that. It took us a long time because for a long time, Jackie being in sales and marketing, we have a really, I think, unique message. But I've gotten a lot of feedback from a lot of leaders saying, hey, while your message is really sticky, think about what the other individual sitting across the table, what they're looking for. It's not always about you, it's about what's in it for them. So that's been important for us. It's been a good realization for us.
At this point, I talked to Seth about the fact that as a department, we've changed our name from Leadership Studies to Masters in Leadership and Community Engagement. I also explained that we're in the process of offering a concentration in community engagement because of how important we feel it is for leaders, for organizations, for different companies. Now, the Morales Group has done a tremendous amount of work, not just locally, but internationally when it comes to community engagement. So I wanted to ask him to provide some information on that. But also, given the current pandemic, a lot of companies are really focusing on their community engagement efforts. So both of us kind of feel that it is going to be something that many organizations and leaders should be on top of, and making sure that their organization and their employees value community engagement. So here is where I asked Seth to discuss a little bit about what the Morales Group does in terms of community engagement.
Yeah, so we're really intentional about our community engagement. One thing that we've done that's been extremely intentional is we have an individual on our team that's dedicated to just building bridges with the community, whether it's local, internationally, or throughout the state. And so her name's Cynthia. Her job is to hold town halls and bring these different community leaders and groups together and talk about what's going on in the community where we can help, or what's an issue we can all kind of tackle together. So that's been really helpful. You got to kind of put your money where your mouth is and invest in the role. We also have a passport series, and so everyone gets a passport when they join full time at Morales Group. And just like traveling the world, you get stamps for going to a new country. We get stamps for serving in the community and personal development. And so every time somebody goes into a local food bank or helps out at a immigrant welcome center or a second chance, offenders program where we're giving back, they're getting a stamp and they're filling up their passport. Well, if they fill up their passport enough with enough stamps where they've been active serving in the community, we then send them to um, Mexico to build homes. And so we've built 16 homes year to date. We send our whole team down there. We usually send about 80 at a time, and they'll go down and build 2 homes, and then we'll do another wave and do the same thing. And that's kind of a way to give back. That's kind of a project, the culmination of a project to really serve the community. I've got a sister who's a missionary down in Mexico, and we've got a kind of a tie there. But that's a great way to kind of bring it all together and show, hey, there's purpose here. There's a reason why we do what we do. And the community is a big part of Morales Group. It's what has helped build our company. We're not going to turn our back on it. And so you got to be intentional. So Jackie's been really good. She created this outreach position. You talked about my wife. She's intentional about finding that role. And she also created the passport. And so when you think about those different intentional acts, that really helps with how we build community at Morales.
So at this point, I explained to Seth that if this was normal circumstances, I either would have had him Skype in during a class session, or if he was in town, I would have brought him in for a guest speaking session. But given that's not available, I know normally at the end of those sessions, I kind of leave it up for questions from anybody. And so I just wanted to give him an opportunity. I know a lot of students usually ask guest speakers just for any kind of advice that they could give for someone who is anticipating being in a leadership position or is in a current leadership position. And since that's a focus for everyone in this program, I asked him if he could share some of his wisdom and some of his advice.
Yeah, a couple things that come into my mind real quick is sprint versus marathon. It's not a sprint. Don't worry about coming out of the gates and making a splash in your first job. It's a long ass race. It's a marathon, and I think you need to be um, patient with the way you learn. Sometimes I see people quickly taking a job that has a higher comp, but they don't learn as much. Whereas somebody could take maybe a lesser paying role, but they're learning from a great mind, a great business mind, a great leader. And I wish more people would take maybe the road less traveled and not worry about kind of making ends meet. Now I get you gotta pay your bills, and that's not always, there's detail there. So that's one thing that I think about sprint versus marathon. It's a long sprint. I think there's a lot of people that come out of school and they're worried about where other people are at. So you're worried about this person and their job and the car that they drive or the neighborhood that they live in. And if you just stop worrying about what other people have and you take a step back and you just put your head down, you grind it out. 5 years later, you come up for air, and then you start to kind of have perspective about what's going on. I think life gets a lot easier. I remember I came out of Purdue. I had just finished playing collegiate football at a very, very high level, winning the Big Ten championship, going to the Rose Bowl, and I was kind of the big man on campus. And I graduated Purdue, and I came back to Indianapolis, and I didn't really have a lot of job prospects. I had 2 job offers. They weren't glamorous, and I wasn't kind of the big man on campus anymore. And I had a buddy who was crushing it in home sales. He was selling homes for a new home builder here in town. He was driving a Cadillac Escalade. He was balling. But I look at it, I'm like, I was so jealous, but then I kind of take a step back and I'm like, if I just knew and saw the big picture, things change. He's in a different role doing different things, and I'm not knocking him, and I'm in a different role doing different things too. But I think when I think about sprint versus marathon, you just got to be patient about kind of building your career and laying that foundation, finding that right opportunity, learning from the right people. So that would be probably my biggest advice is just know that it's a long race and know that you don't need to be looking on either side of like who's ahead, because at the end of the day, it's going to be a long time. You don't have to look. You just focus on your race alone.
Here I asked Seth about networking. I know I usually have a lot of students who are curious about the best approach to networking, so here is Seth's advice.
I've got a lot to say on that. First, you got to go play in traffic. You can't just sit back and wait for it to come to you. You have to be very active. So I always encourage people to just get in traffic and meet people and be very active. The second thing is I call it Rucker Park. And if you've ever heard of Rucker Park, it's in New York City, and it's where a lot of New York City playground legends have come and played pickup basketball. And it's kind of the who's who of some of the most talented players. I always challenge people to think about, hey, where's your Rucker Park? I just spoke to a class at Purdue University a few months back before um, we got into this whole crisis, and I challenged them. I was like, find your Rucker Park. Where's that game of pickup basketball where you can network and connect with other leaders that are going to make you better? And Rucker Park was like the best of the best. So you want to be the worst player on the court when you're networking. You want to find those that are really going to make you push. You want to be playing with guys like LeBron or Kevin Durant, where you're getting to a point where you're so uncomfortable that you're learning from their every move. And I think a lot of us are really content with just kind of hanging out in our own little small game of pickup basketball game and not looking for that kind of next level. It doesn't have to be Rucker Park. It could be a level up, but how do you level up your networking game? How do you get uncomfortable and make sure that you're getting invited to those games? Or if you're not even getting invited, how do you create your own games? And so I'm always challenging people to think about what's your Rucker Park look like and how can you be more intentional with your network that way.
Here I asked Seth if there's anything else he would like to share with us.
Now, man, those are all good questions. I mean, networking and thinking about sprint versus marathon. I think as you talk about communication, the most important thing you can do, no matter what you do, your job is to tell your story. And so if you're not really concise and you don't have your story down pat, I think you're going to struggle, whether it's an interview or you're becoming a leader and being able to communicate on different platforms. Really being able to tell your story and the art of storytelling is really important, and being able to kind of get it kind of concise and into some bite-sized chunks that people can relate with. When I talk about our story, tomato migrant worker, my grandfather dying of cancer, I talk about me as a walk-on at Purdue catching the game-winning pass from Drew Brees and doing that, and how that transfers over into business, and how we try to give it's just kind of this package story. And I encourage everyone to kind of think about what their story is and how to really kind of make that story sticky.
And I end by thanking Seth for sharing his time with us.
Absolutely, man. My pleasure.